You're listening to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis, a podcast designed to explore the personal mission of everyday leaders. Hear from men and women who are making a difference in their corner of the world and discover what keeps them on mission.
Welcome to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis. I'm Jonathan Shealy. We're joined today by Tim McPhillips, Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Maranatha. Tim joined us a few weeks ago on the podcast sharing his journey to Maranatha. We had to end the recording before hearing the end of the story, so we came back today, and Tim had just left Ironwood and moved to start a replant of Proclaim Baptist Church. Tim, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back here.
In a million years, I never would have thought you'd be one of our first repeat guests.
Yeah.
All right. So
neither did I. When John asked me, I'm like, really?
No, we didn't get the rest of the story.
This is an honor for you.
There's two ways to look at it. Either, wow, I really gave good content, or two, I talked too much. And we couldn't get
you
through
didn't talk too much. You got a lot to say. And it's been a fascinating journey to see how God's led in your life. And that's so much of what this podcast is about, is seeing the Lord lead. And exactly what does that mean? I mean, it's not a fire and a cloud and a pillar of, the presence of God leading us through our lives anymore. So we search for that, and we want to know how God leads and trace the steps for people that we look up to and that we respect and we see that have a sincere desire to please the Lord. And then we want to pattern ourselves after what God's Word tells us and the examples that we see. So in your journey, you went through Christian college, graduated from Maranatha, yay, and went on to help our own Dr. Brian Brock plant the church there in what I would consider more Southern California, right?
Absolutely.
And as they transitioned and you did, it was kind of like, okay, where's the next place that God's going to have us? And you end up in what I would consider more like Northern California.
Yes.
It's a Sacramento suburb. Is that how you would describe
suburb of Sacramento, yes.
Yeah. So tell me how you found that location and how God opened that door for you.
When that transition from Southern California, we recognized the Lord was leading. It was like, okay, I'm going to go into pastoring. That's
because you had been bivocational.
Yes.
And kind of the government contracting side of things, and it was private sector, but then you're working with all these military different applications with that, and seeing some success on that. I mean, I've seen awards on your bookshelf.
Yes.
With some big numbers on there in the sales arena.
Yes.
And so you're seeing success with that. And how does being bivocational fit together with your desire to be a church planter and pastor?
Yes, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
There's always a tension pulling you, particularly, as you know, with ministry, sometimes you don't see tangible results of your labor in your lifetime sometimes. And on the work side, I'm seeing tangible results every week when the sales report comes in.
Interesting, yeah.
And so there was that constant tension. But in the transitions of what was happening at LifePoint, the Lord was just clearly directing my wife and I that it's time to stop being bivocational and be all in on the pastoring side, kind of a fish or cut bait moment.
Okay.
And
were you looking at that point for a church planting experience, or in this case, kind of a replant revitalization, or did you hope to find an existing church that might call you as their pastor?
The second one.
Okay.
Church planting was not on our radar. It was not something I was looking for. And I was kind of passively looking. So I'm still working my senior project management job. And I'm like, all right, Lord, I know you're leading in this direction, but how do I prepare my family, my finances, going from senior project management income to ministry income? I'm like, how am I going to do this? So,
and your family at this point is, you have 2 kids, and about how old would they have been at that point?
They would have been late elementary.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that was like a November time frame. I was like, okay, I'm just praying. And then come January, I get a call I didn't expect from my boss. He's like, Tim, we're cutting back. We're laying off most of the project managers.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, Okay, how much time do I have? He goes, 30 days. And I hung up. I kind of sat in my desk, kind of dumbfounded. And then I'm like, all right, Lord, you answered that prayer. How am I going to? It was a moment for my wife and I. Was like, we're just going to take this step of faith. I'm not going to look for secular employment. I'm going to pursue ministry.
Did you see that phone call? Maybe eventually. I'll ask it that way. Probably not immediately. But did you see that phone call as the Lord's leading?
Absolutely. It was the push. It was the Lord's leading. And I think I remember my conversation with my wife afterwards, like, what are we going to do? And we included our pastor, where I was assisting in LifePoint, Kit Johnson. We included him in the conversation, and it just became clear, how are we going to respond to this? The Lord is working in us. It's really important how I respond, not just in the Lord's next steps for me, but how my children see their mom and dad respond.
Yeah. How long did it take you to flip the switch to see that as God's leading?
I would say in about a week or two.
Okay.
It was pretty quick that we just, because we had to make the decision, like, do I need to
You didn't have a lot of time.
resumes out? Do
Right.
I? And so we quickly shifted gears.
I think that's something people ought to take note of, because professionally, you were losing your job.
Yes.
A lot of people have been through that in the last 10 years. You know, the ups and downs of the economy through no fault of their own. They find themselves downsized, laid off, and yet at the moment, it's got to feel, I mean, as a man, it's got to feel like a blow to your career and your, you're climbing the ladder and you're being successful, and now all of a sudden you're being told, sorry, your services are no longer wanted here. Pack up your desk and leave. At that point, not to pile on, but at that point, it sure seems like less than success, like failure. And yet you're flipping the switch within 1 week going, wait a minute, this isn't a failure. This is God leading me. This is God taking something off my plate so that he can put something else on my plate. Now let's not wallow around in self-pity. Let's pick up the pieces and figure out what the next open door looks like. And so you had 1 month notice, and you took 1 week to talk it over and talk with your pastor as an advisor and talk with your wife. And then where do you go from there?
Where do we go from there? I'm sending out resumes to churches, and how do you interact with a church where I haven't been in ministry in the capacity they're looking for?
Right.
My ministry, like I said last time, my ministry path didn't fit the normal trajectory of ministry, so some churches shy away from that.
Yeah.
And then we made a decision: do we go back east? This God wants us out west, and we made a decision we're staying out west. So that really narrows some options down.
Mm-hmm.
And
but even the selection or calling of a pastor is a longer term process usually than 3 weeks, which you have at this point.
Absolutely.
As far as income coming in.
Yes.
So that's got to be like, it could take 6 months or more for them to make a decision, and you go through pulpit committees and candidating and votes and, fellowships and
Yes. And there was discouragement in those. I mean, that was a busy 4 weeks, and it was I went out and visited a church member, Dr. John Brock, to get some counsel and how to go about this. And he recommended reaching out to Ironwood.
Yep.
He's on the board there, so it just so happens Ironwood was working on an idea of how to draw men out west to pastor churches.
Right. I remember talking with Sam Brock about that, and David Brock, actually.
David Brock. So I met with Sam. Mm-hmm. When I met with Sam, I didn't know about this. I was just going to Sam, hey, you're a camp director. You hear of churches looking for pastors. Is there any...
Camp directors know everybody.
And there's something about Sam when you meet with him. When he starts asking you questions, his mind's going a different direction. So he's like, how old are you? How many kids do you have? And he's like, okay. And he just keeps asking, I just asked, where are you going? And he shared this project they were working on. And then so his brother, David Brock, who headed up the project, reached out to me, and we met, and our families had dinner together. And I kind of was their guinea pig to see.
You were one of the first.
Yes.
Oh,
so,
wow.
So my time, so we left Apple Valley. We waited till the kids were done in May with school, moved to Ironwood for 1 year transition. That provided us a place to live because I had to sell the house we were living in. And it was so funny. The joke I have is, okay, I was at senior project management income. Lord, I'm praying 6 months earlier, how do I get to pastoral income? He puts me at camp income.
You were good to go. At that point, pastoral income was a big step up.
Yes. So to put it in perspective, we got about $800 a month, and God provided our needs the whole time.
Wow. And so you actually lived at camp.
Yep.
Which I think most teenagers think about that being like ideal. And I'm sure your
my
kids
kids
probably had a
like
wonderful
Ironwood
time.
was always, Ironwood was Disney World growing up for my kids, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so
Kids, I hope you won't be too disappointed. We're going to live at Disney World.
yeah. And that 1 year was fun. It was fun. It was a learning experience working with Pastor David Brock. He made me the bookkeeper of Golden State Association of Christian Schools, which was
Wonderful.
Was an experience. And
Yes.
I got to plan and coordinate the educators conference that year, and then I wasn't on pastoral staff, but I was an assistant essentially at the church that he was pastoring. So I was teaching every week, preaching when he was unable to. There was lots of ministry, and one of the special things that was on my schedule is I think it was 3 times a week, I don't remember, but from morning till noon, I was with Walt Brock in his wood shop, which is him and I.
Wow.
I don't think much was accomplished, meaning he would take a break and then he would just pepper me with thinking questions. And
there's nothing like the wisdom of a godly mentor,
yes,
someone who has been there and done that, and who has been intentional about it. And Walt Brock, his brother John Brock, those are two guys that really epitomize that kind of thing, and the investment, the willingness to invest in a younger person and try and pass some of that along. And was that the goal of that time there, or was that a accidental God, product of that time?
It would have been accidental me, but
Okay.
I believe David Brock was in the background. It wasn't accidental for him.
Okay.
And, Walt Brock has always been one of those men that God has put in front of me. But when people think of Ironwood, they think of Ironwood today. They don't know the testimony
Because he
God's
founded
goodness.
the camp.
He started the
Right.
camp in the middle of nowhere with one little cinder block building. And but the trials that he gone through, and I think what made him just a great time of mentoring, he was very transparent with me to even share just how his thoughts struggled during those times and how God had to work through him. We just think that many times we think men that God used in a great way, we think, oh, they had it easy. Everything they touch turns to gold. And Walt's testimony is just one of faithfulness to what God has called him to do.
There's an element of perseverance in the face of challenges and kind of undaunted conviction that God wants this to happen and is willing to use us to do it. And so it's always, okay, there's a challenge. Now let's figure our way through it.
Yes.
And I see that sort of founder's mentality in certain people that God raises up and gives that tenacity, that persistence. But we really all need to have that. We need to have that connection to be truly convictional about something. And we want young people to develop those convictions about what are the non-negotiables, what are the things God's called you to accomplish, and how might you see him use you to overcome the obstacles that no doubt arise. It isn't everything is success automatically. I was reading an article recently about a young lady who said she wanted to be a Nashville singer, a star. And she said, but She was going to give it 3 months, and if it didn't work out, she would pursue a different career path. Wow, 3 months of persistence. That's really, really something. And, that's kind of the mentality. We want everything quick. We want immediate success, and we want to only see the success curve go up in a worldly sense. And here you are kind of literally in the desert for a while, and it might have felt that way at times, but God gave you woodshed experiences. Now, in my experience growing up, my dad would take me to the woodshed, and we weren't going for a chat. All right, no. That was a proverbial woodshed. And
well, there was a chat involved.
Well, they were instructive moments. Let me put it that way.
You look from Scripture, God's woodshed with His men and women.
Yeah,
is sometimes it's the woodshed experience we had with our dad, where it was not a chat.
Right.
But then there's other times the woodshed experience for Elijah was a still small voice when he was discouraged in the cave. And
probably the difference is our openness and our mindset to receive the instruction. Yeah. Interesting.
And no one knows what I need more than my God.
So how long does that time last at Ironwood, and at what point does a prospect or an opportunity emerge that kind of works into the Ironwood church planting program that you're now the prototypical guy? I don't imagine they have all their guys come out there for a year and wait, but
no, the design was for
you.
young guys right out of college to come and do 3 years there, work on their master's program while working at Ironwood.
Okay.
Michael Olson came in after me. He got his master's from Maranatha while working in that program at Ironwood. He's now pastoring a church in Utah. And so I got there in May with my family, and then by the end of the summer, getting into things, by the end of the summer, I got a call from Pastor Ron Perry and from Faith Baptist in Folsom, and he put in front of me this church plant in Roseville, which at the time was not called Proclaim. It was Faith Baptist Church in Roseville. Ron Perry was the interim pastor. They had been without a pastor for 2 years. So the church started, and in a very, probably about 2 years, the church planter, the Lord led him on, and it wasn't fully grounded yet as a church plant. They had a chartering service, they had a constitution, but it just, there were some key things missing. And so the first year of their existence without a pastor, they tried to find a pastor on their own, which is, as we know, is not easy, particularly for a small church. And then the second year they reached out to Ron Perry. His ministry was the mother church that helped plant this church. Said, will you come and help us? And so Ron and I go all the way back to counseling in Ironwood when we were 18. We were both new believers. We were council buddies. Our cabins were side by side. Oh. Silverado and Santa Fe were our cabins. So Ron reached out to me and he gauged my interest, and I'm like, I don't know, I wasn't thinking church planting, and this is a church, this is a do-over. And but it's hard when it's always dangerous when you say yes, I'll pray about it. We hear so many testimonies of that.
Right.
And my wife and I just started praying about it, and there were a couple other options, and it just became very clear this is where we're going. So there was a couple things I wanted back from this church. One is, do you see yourself as a church plant? Because if you do, then I can go and raise mission support as a church planter. If you don't, it's going to be pretty impossible to be able to support my family up there.
Yeah. Did they have a building or any kind of recognizable location?
They rented a conference room from Roseville Executive Suites, like Regis office buildings you go rent an office, and they rented the conference.
That makes sense, because Sundays you wouldn't have too many businesses there.
And we had two of those offices. One was the pastor's office, and one was the nursery on Sunday.
Okay.
Not the best location for a church plant, because the only entrance we could use was the back entrance, and it looked like a warehouse entrance. It's got all these warning signs on it.
Oh, no.
And it was just a horrible, like the first time we went there, we didn't know where to go. Like, you had to drive to the back of the building. Yeah. No matter how many arrow signs you have, it was not ideal for church planting. And so so that was the fall, August of 2016. By November, we took a candidating trip up there, and they voted on January 1st, 2018. On New Year's Day, they voted us in. It was 22 people, and but it was a committed group, an older group, and we got up there at the end 6 months later. So I was going up once a month to be a part. Our family was.
How far a drive is that?
It's 6 hours.
Yeah.
So every weekend
Not
we loaded up. The
exactly-
family loaded up.
Oof.
Yeah. My son won a big reading award in school that year because, like, he read over 150 pages that school year, 150,000 pages that school year. Like, he had a crazy reading. He's a big reader, and
I'd get car sick. You know,
yeah,
that would drive me nuts.
he was another world. And so we got up there in May of 2017, and we went after it, and it was an exciting group of people. They were eager. Like, the end of the tunnel they had gone through, the light. They had seen the light. They're come through this trial, and we got after it. But 2 years, it was 2 years. I called it 2 years of ministry cobwebs were now there, of no shepherd.
Yeah, that's a
just
dynamic
existing.
I don't think a lot of people understand. I talked with Pastor Will Cover down in Houston here on the podcast, and we talked about the challenges of church planting. And one of the difficulties is when you start a church, especially in an urban area, people are coming to you from somewhere, and they bring their own ideas and experiences, and maybe bad ideas and bad experiences too. And so you're kind of deconstructing some of that in order to build something new and create a new identity for this local church as a standalone without necessarily, can I call it the baggage maybe that people bring from previous experiences. There's a reason that they're leaving whatever church they're in and coming here. And so sometimes that's great. Sometimes it can cause a challenge for somebody trying to create a unified direction for the new church. Or they're competing. Sometimes there can be competing visions for what that ought to look like. And so that's where a lot of the work comes in for the church planter. And without a building, I guess that probably compounds the problem to do that.
It compounded the problem from ministry logistics, but it also simplified things not having the overhead.
Sure.
So like during COVID, not we're renting a different location, a much better, but we did not have the stress that a lot of ministries had of COVID because we didn't have a building. And it gave us a lot of flexibility.
Well, in California was real interesting on how they really locked things down aggressively for a long time during all that.
Thankfully, we lived in Placer County, which is the most politically conservative county in the state. Yeah.
See, we think of California sometimes as a monolithic, liberal nightmare.
If you look at an electoral map, like by counties, and you see this little blue dot, downtown Sacramento, and it's all red all around it in Northern California.
Well, and you were in one of those, so it was as friendly as it could be. Obviously, the state level stuff.
It wasn't like Santa Barbara County or some of the other places that you heard.
Now, at some point in all this, your family changes a little bit.
It changes drastically.
So at what point does that start to happen?
Probably within our first year. Adoption was something my wife and I have always wanted to do. Something we took seriously from the position of a believer's role and the church's role, as we see from Scripture, to care for the fatherless. We were in the middle of the process when I was laid off in Southern California, so we had to stop. And we were doing the training part. So when we got up to California and we got settled, we talked to our kids again. Now they're junior high and 6th grade, 5th grade, and they are on board with us. So we began the process.
Well, people have lots of different reasons for pursuing adoption. Sometimes it's an infertility challenge. But your situation was very intentional, and I think that's interesting to try and explore that, just even your mindset and why you wanted to take this on, because you kind of knew this could be a pretty big challenge.
Yes.
And yet, God laid it on your heart to pursue this, and really twice. So that I've noticed that, especially through the foster care type of adoption, that can be very heartbreaking. You know, many different attempts that start and stop, or you just when you think this is maybe someone who's going to join your family, you have to pretty much open up your heart, and be very vulnerable to that. And then the system decides, no, we're going to replace them or place them with someone else.
Yes.
Did you guys have that experience a few times?
We never had a reunification. The 3 little ones we have were the 3 that we got.
Wow.
And, we watched.
Well, you just spoiled the whole story. You just mentioned the.
Sorry.
We'll have to edit that out.
All right. So the year before that, before we moved, we watched a Maranatha alumni, Mark and Charity Brock, adopt in Bakersfield, California. And we really watched and learned, asked lots of questions. We went to the hearings, and we just saw the need in our community, in the foster community. Mm-hmm. And when we get into the training and see, quite frankly, this may ruffle some feathers, the church has abandoned that. I'm in training, and I see about 70% in the classroom are grandma and grandpas having to take their grandchildren.
Their own grandkids. So they have to go through this county, Child Protective Services, social workers put on the classes, and grandma and grandpa are going to step in and help out. But before they are allowed to do it legally, they have to go through this class.
Yes.
Like they haven't already been down this
Correct.
road once.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, from the first time we started it, and when we started the second time, California stepped in and says, enough counties. California actually streamlined a process. It used to be like...
Sounds like it needed to be.
It used to be like a year to get through it, even if you're family, to a month.
A month?
Yeah.
For the foster care level?
It was 3 months of classroom training down to 2 weeks.
Oh.
And so they really streamlined it, particularly, and it was because so many of the cases were, these are grandma and grandpa, aunt and uncles. Why? And it's just bogging down the system. And so I was impressed with our state that they streamlined it.
So you jump in the class, 70-80% of them are grandmas and grandpas.
And then it was same-sex couples, marriages. Mm-hmm. And to have a traditional family like ours is rare. And so social workers and the CPS will latch onto those families. Like, because we were worried about the in-home studies. Like, they do a psych eval, like make sure
you're in big trouble on that.
Yeah. And they ask those questions. Why do you want to adopt?
Okay.
Because they're looking for red flags, like we just lost a child, or I'm infertile. Those are red flags.
Really?
Well, they want to make sure
you're doing it for the
right reasons.
Okay.
Because it is hard.
Yeah.
And they don't. The worst thing ever is to have a placement and then get it back, the child back, and they're trying to avoid it.
The system is not designed with the prospective parent's best interest in mind. These systems are designed to protect these young children and what's in their best interest.
Yes.
And ping-ponging around in all these different locations is absolutely not in their best interest. So I laud and respect those aims, those goals. Mm-hmm. They're not always perfectly implemented, as we know. But you're going through the class and realizing that the church is not well represented here. And
no, we have given that over
yeah.
to the secular humanist mindset of children.
Are there enough families doing foster care, or is the system overwhelmed?
Oh, it's way overwhelmed. When I interact with believers, I believe every believer should prayerfully consider their involvement with the fatherless. I'm not saying adopt. Everyone has to adopt. But their involvement. So our little church of 50 people, when we adopted, most of them grandma and grandpas were our best support system. I mean, praying for us, cheering us on, not making passing judgment of what they see happening. Because, I mean, for my wife and I, that's hard at times. Like, boy, people think we don't parent our kids. No, we do. We just dealing with some unique issues here.
Right.
And that's hard to overcome, particularly for Mandy at times. But I think every believer ought to prayerfully consider their involvement. And even within that, what level, if you say, yeah, I'm going to adopt, or I'm just going to foster. What level are you going to? Meaning just infants? The older you get, the harder the cases, because there's trauma, there's abuse. So in California, I used to get emails daily from CPS. Can you take this 12-year-old girl, 14-year-old girl, 15, that range, all human trafficking related. And they're all addicted to multiple drugs. And it's just prevalent. And it's like, my wife and I were like, if it was just my wife and I, we would entertain those type of cases. But we just decided two and younger.
You've got teenagers almost now.
Correct.
And they're part of the process, part of the dynamic in your family. And you're obviously talking with them too about this is kind of our whole family is doing this.
In our training, I don't know how accurate their sources are on this, but of children who come into the system abused, 1 in 4 will be re-abused in foster homes.
Oh, that's horrible.
It is.
The very people who are sent to help them end up hurting them again. So then that obviously makes, I would guess, pretty suspicious and guarded then about opening up themselves to the possibility that someone might actually have their best interests in mind.
Yes.
It's understandable how that does a lot of harm to somebody's development, psychologically, spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to learn an awful lot about alternative parenting. You'd been through this with your own kids and probably thought, we were pretty good, mom and dad. We got this down.
Parenting, when all you can do is redirect and
because of some of the limitations that
correct.
are put on you as foster.
CPS would say, these are not your children, they're our children until adoption.
Yeah.
And so,
gotta respect that.
But I'll tell you, we had really good experiences with CPS. And the saying in the foster adoption world is your social worker makes or breaks your experience. And so when we had our home study social worker come in, we were worried because they wanted to talk to Titan and Claire, our 2 children, without us in the room. And
really?
Yes.
Can you politely decline that? Or is that
and I asked, well, she came for the first day to interview Mandy and I.
Yeah.
And it was all basically looking at our relationship. Like, is this a good marital relation? It shocked me that they cared. and my friend Mark Brock.
Yeah, that's almost politically incorrect at this point. Yeah.
Yes. And so that gentleman, Mark Brock, I mentioned, I asked him, like, how did you guys handle this? He goes, Tim, listen, most of those social work, when they come in the first 30 seconds, they know what kind of home they're going to be dealing with. And when they walk into a home and they see an intact family with kids that love their parents who are interacting with each other, that's not the norm of what they walk into.
Sadly true.
It is. And so much so that when that social worker came back the next day to interview Titan and Claire, she goes, I was telling my girlfriend last night about this married couple I met, and they're actually best friends. Like, they call each other their best friends. Like, she was just baffled by this. But these became huge open gospel doors for us. And Mandy's like, well, let me tell you why we're best friends.
Can I ask you about that? You mentioned that the experience that you had was really good with the social workers. I would venture to say that's not always the case.
No, it's not.
But in your situation, getting to know some of those individuals at a personal level as well, or seeing any glimpses of that anyway, what do you think we could do to help support and minister to them? What are they going through?
A social worker's job is basically to get yelled at every day, all day long. They get yelled at by the parents who lost their children. They get yelled at by foster homes. They get yelled at by the lawyers of those parents, the lawyers of the children, and they get their characters attacked in the courtroom by those lawyers and the judge. I mean, it's just, so we joke, our 5-year-old had 2 social workers. Both of them got out of their job after our case.
Oh, really?
So we're like, Bonnie pushed him over the edge.
Bonnie's my buddy, all right?
Yes, she is.
She is awesome. So that's, all your girls are my buddies, and I have enjoyed seeing them really blossom and grow here, even in the short time that they've been here. And that's been really neat to see, just the love of God, the love of a family, and the love of a community kind of come alongside. Because like you're saying, it takes more support than just mom and dad in these scenarios. And it's not all just a rosy, Annie type story.
Yeah.
But that it's hard work along the way as well, and there are ups and downs. There are massive challenges that you've inherited. It's one thing to live through life and try and overcome the mistakes you made for yourself. It's another thing to try to overcome and inherit someone else's baggage and try and make the best of that and to pour yourself into them. And you guys have done that in a way that's life-changing for these young ladies. And I just can't wait to see God use them as they continue to grow and flourish under your guidance. But the people that live in that system all day long, every day, my heart goes out to them because that's rough.
It's a hard job.
Yeah, and you get jaded and cynical real fast.
What I've learned in the process of observing, we had a teenage foster daughter who was a classmate of Titan and Claire's, and she had just gotten saved at one of our Bible studies before COVID. She ran away from home during COVID, and she came and stayed with us for about a month. And one of the things I can tell you, the system does not always make decisions in the best interest of the child. And that's frustrating.
They say that's the desire, but it's not always achieved that way. Huh?
It's not always the case. And so to be working in that system and seeing all your labor, you do all your trainings on display. We sat in the hearings and watched our social workers get raked over the coals and question everything about their integrity. Like somehow this is some secret plan to steal children from parents.
Yeah, like they have any dog in the fight. They're just trying to represent the children in the best interest for them. I see that with guardian ad litems in the system as well. Someone who's appointed by the court to represent the children's interests, and they just are trying to sort out between people telling very different stories, which case is going to be the best for the kids.
Yeah, and one of the best ways, there's a church in California that, like National Adoption Day, they make that a big day in their church. There's several families fostering and adopting. And so just like I believe Calvary does like a blue and white Sunday, where we bring law enforcement and emergency services in, they do that with social workers.
Really?
And the county, the social workers set up a display in the back of how to get involved in fostering. And it's just an opportunity to love on the social workers and share the gospel with them.
Yep.
But
you're also opening up those ministry opportunities to the families in the church.
Yes.
And is that a little bit contagious? I mean, you start to see people getting their eyes open to that. And
I would say
exploring.
in the last 10, 15 years, I don't want to say it's trendy, but to adopt and to get involved that way is growing in the church. My experience as a child in conservative fundamental churches was fostering was looked down upon. Why would you invite that into your house? Why would you bring invite the world into your house? They're broken.
They're children.
Well, the reality is we're all broken.
Yeah.
Their brokenness just manifests itself in, unfortunately, some really hard ways. And to see there has been this transition, and there's the three main ways to adopt is overseas. So Mandy and I consider we'll never have the money. It's tens of thousands of dollars to overseas to adopt overseas, and it's games. It's kind of black market deals in some of those countries, and and then private adoption, where you work with an adoption agency like a Bethany House. But both of those involved a good chunk of change that we just couldn't do. Yeah. Going through your CPS system, there's no cost. And, I mean, this shouldn't be the reason you do it, but they do reimburse and compensate you for the care.
While you're a foster parent, they're providing the expenses for the young person that you're
until they turn 18.
Yeah. But if you adopt,
it's still there.
You still do get the assistance.
It was a Ronald Reagan era bill.
It kind of makes sense. Otherwise, it would disincentivize.
And that's why they changed that in the 80s at the national level. But it's only if you go through CPS.
I see. So private adoption.
It's tried it because so many people were fostering and not doing anything beyond that.
Right.
And so now I say all that. That's not why you adopt or foster, because my wife figured it out. It's 30 cents an hour.
Oh, wow. Yeah, not the highest paying gig.
If that's why you're doing it. But, it was intentional. It was, one, to example it for our church, one, to bring in some children into our church. Our family was the only children, and those little ones, when we got Bonnie at 7 months old, and when she started coming to church, she became everyone's child, everyone's grandchild, everyone. It changed the dynamic of our church. That's why I always say it is a good thing when we hear babies and children in the auditorium. Yeah. It's not a bad thing in church. It's a good thing.
Yeah, don't get annoyed when you hear that baby. That is the church. Yeah. Right? I mean, that's something we all have to work on. So God's blessing your family. You're expanding. I think it probably expanded a little quicker and unexpectedly,
not what we anticipated,
in some ways, because you got kind of a 2-for-1 situation there along the way, and God's given you 3 wonderful, beautiful girls, all with unique challenges and blessings along the way. And I'm sure, you wouldn't look back. But at the same time, when I got to know you, you weren't in Northern California anymore. God had led your family to Colorado.
Yes.
And so tell me about that stopover on your sort of eventual path here to Maranatha.
Yeah. So about just over 5 years in the church plant there. The church, there was a grounding there. We had wiped out all those cobwebs of ministry. And we just came to some conclusions with the family dynamic changes in our home, like going from 2 kids to 5 kids, 2 teenagers, 3 on 5 and under, who have some unique needs from being in the system. We had to make a change, and the Lord clearly led. We stepped down in Sacramento, didn't know what was next. And Beth Eden Baptist Church was one of our mission supporters. Yeah. And Pastor Jason Pilcher said, "Tim, come here." Right. And going there, in him and I's mind, we always talked about, wouldn't it be so much fun if we could minister together? Like, it was just, we just meshed well. And
so God gave you a little time together with
so we did 1 year there.
Yeah. And I don't know, it seems like wherever you land, you just end up doing whatever needs to get done.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
That is a fair statement.
So what all things did he put you in charge of it?
Well, when I first
not in charge of, but what were you involved with?
Well, when I first got there, the church where we left really loved us well. They did not want us having the pressure of paying bills. So they continued our salary through the end of the year, which was like 3-4 more months.
Oh, wow.
So that first 3-4 months there, we got settled in Denver, and there was a lot of work with our little ones because change, they need routine. And so Pastor Jason asked me, "Can you teach the junior senior Bible class and just help me with whatever I need?"
You're like, this is a very non-specific job description.
But it was part-time. And so I was teaching this class twice a week. And it was so funny. We, in teaching this class, one of the seniors finally just yelled out one day, I was using an illustration of my life. You guys will laugh because of this podcast we're doing. He goes, "Mr. McPhillips, is there anything you haven't done or anything you have anywhere you haven't been?" Like, he just and I just said, "Thank you, Lord." And I worked at that first semester. I worked part-time. It's like, "Mandy, you don't work, you don't eat." That is a clear scriptural. I was like, yep. I need to work, even though the church is growing. So I got a part-time job at Hobby Lobby.
There you go.
And that was one of the sweetest times. I call it it's brain dead work, meaning you don't, like, I'm just stocking shelves and I'm not,
bringing that home at night with the stress.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm not opening up a laptop in the evening or answering phone calls. And and so it was a sweet time of God, just him and I communing as I'm stocking Christmas decorations and being full of glitter.
Oh, I would imagine you probably.
Oh, my kids made fun of me every night when I came home covered in glitter.
Oh, funny.
But and then the second semester, I became their athletic director full time at the Christian school. I started teaching more classes. I started teaching a class we called Life Point, which the semester was we went over dating.
Oh, fun.
And how to, like, these practical life application classes, we can't assume even Christian homes, our parents are teaching those things. And it became an amazing class. Actually used Sam Brock's curriculum. He wrote a workbook on dating.
Uh-oh.
And
that could be controversial.
Yeah.
You walk in and tell a group of teenagers you're going to talk about dating. No more eye contact. It's just all now down.
Some of the best conversations. I just made
Takes a while.
I made it a discussion group, and there were hard conversations. And there were things like a guy would say something, and I'm like, I understand what you're saying. Girls, take note. This is a red flag.
Oh. Ouch.
And the guy owned it. He's like, his view of dating and marriage was for his happiness. Like,
uh-oh. Yeah, that is a major red flag. We can get into that on another episode.
Yes.
So I was in India.
Yes.
This last summer, and Dr. Jim Harrison was retiring from his position as VP for advancement, and we had the position posted for a while, and not a lot of clear direction yet on how that was going to be filled. And so when I was in India with your friend and mine, Brian Brock, and our families were together, he mentioned you as a potential candidate for that role. And I guess you were also talking to him about that possibility. So who started the conversation? Was it you, or was it somebody called you, or how did that happen?
I saw when Maranatha first posted Jim's position, and I'm like, oh, Jim Harrison retired. That was not interested. Lord, you're having me in the pastoring route. And then that was at the end of the semester. And then the summer goes by, and Brian Brock and his wife and family passed through. They spent like 4 or 5 hours at our house on vacation.
Yep.
And we got talking about my next steps. And it was good. We were talking pastoring, nothing definitive. You didn't mention the job. And then 2 weeks go by, I see that posting again, and I'm like, maybe I should consider this. And that's when I texted him 2 questions. One, is this a real job posting, or is Maranatha required to post it, but they already have someone? Because it seemed to me
for 3 months? No.
Yeah, but it seemed to me like this type of position, you are, but you didn't. And then 2, because of our unique ministry time together as his assistant, I asked him, do you think this would be a good fit for me? Mm-hmm. And he responds, in India, 1, yes, it is a real posting. And 2, when we were with each other 2 weeks ago, I was going to mention about you and Mandy coming to work at Maranatha. And at that time, he didn't have a position in mind. He goes, but I decided to not say that and keep quiet and let the Lord lead.
Yeah. He told me he was having a hard time not saying anything before he had heard from you, because he didn't want to, play the Holy Spirit or whatever and people say about that. But then when you contacted him, it was like, open door.
And that's what he says. He goes, now that you've asked, I'm going to let it rip. That's what he said. And he just laid out. And he mentioned a term that was new to Mandy and I this last year, and it kept growing in our hearts, the ministry of multiplication. And that's a big component of what we do here at Maranatha.
Yeah.
And it just so happens after our initial, that was July. You guys are interacting in India. And then I send in the resume. My brother, who's a Maranatha graduate, works in Minneapolis. Him and his wife, that's what they do, is resumes. And they help me put it together. And
it did look a little extra. I mean, you really nailed the resume. No, I'm just teasing.
Well, funny story. When we coming with that, so I don't hear anything. I'm like, a month goes by, and I'm like, and I told Pastor Jason Pilchard right away about it, and I told my wife when I submitted, I'm like, yeah, I think it's a long shot. It's not good. I wasn't getting my hopes up. I mean, I love Maranatha. This is a dear place to me. And I'm like, I'm not going to get my hopes up. Maranatha, having Tim McPhillips in executive leadership, no, there's still people there who remember me.
Yeah, believe me, I had that concern myself when I came in. Mrs. Gordon had been in the student life office when we were students, and when I came back to Watertown, she still worked in the student life office, and I was very concerned about that, what she might recall or have, physical records. So when she retired, that was like, okay, all right, we can finally take a sigh of relief. But yeah, that I know exactly what you mean by that.
So we have a missions conference during that waiting period, and I spent a lot of time with a missionary who that's what he does, is ministry of multiplication, and he was trying to get me to partner with him and going overseas to teach. And the idea, my wife and I, we don't separate. Since Iraq, I don't leave my wife.
Oh, that's good.
That's just, and so I didn't hear nothing. I'm like, okay, well, didn't get my hopes up. And then we start our teaching round. They hand me a contract to teach the next year. I go to sign it. I notice a typo. I hold off in signing it. And then we have our teacher in service. And lo and behold, I'm looking at the workshops. I'm like, Dana Davis. Oh, Matt's wife. And then not only that, her topics were exactly where Mandy and I were with our 3 little ones.
Yeah.
And so I called Mandy. I asked my boss, can my wife come to these? And she come. So yeah. So we go to all of Dana's workshops, which were just on point. And encouragement. Sometimes as a parent in our situation with adopted, you just need to know you're not out there. Like, okay, we are seeing this correctly. And those workshops were outstanding. And in between the first workshop and the second one, she walked by and I said, hey, Dana, how was India? She's like,
how did you know about that?
How did you know? I go, well, we have mutual friends, Brian and Rebecca Brock. Oh, you're that Tim McPhillips. I'm like, oh, what does that mean? So we start having conversations, the 3 of us, and we were just talking. I don't know how Watertown came up. We were talking about our newlywed years here and how Watertown's a fun town to live in. It is a great community. And we were just sharing that. Dana goes, well, have you ever thought about coming back to Watertown? And I'm like, okay, this is a softball.
Yeah,
like
right.
I know there's this resume out there. And I laugh, and Mandy's smiling at me, and I go, well, that's my resume. I turned in a resume to Maranatha. She's like, oh, okay. Conversation ends. Next workshop, she comes back. We start talking again. And she asks another question. So your resume, what position? No, she asked me, if there's anything you could do in the whole world, what would you want to do? And I just start laughing. I'm like, Mandy ends up answering because I didn't know how to answer. Mandy goes, Vice President for Institutional Advancement. She goes, that's what your resume's in for. She goes, you'll be my boss.
Well, yeah.
And then the next day you texted me to ask if you could call me.
Well, I do what I'm told.
Yeah. So you called me. My wife and I are excited. We were in a Goodwill store when you texted that.
Oh, that's funny.
And so, I remember I printed off the job description, my resume. I had everything in front of me ready for the phone call. And you call and you're like, well, you mentioned Brian and Rebecca are really good friends of yours. Like they did their job to help move you forward. And then she goes, huh? And then you talk to my wife. So I figured I might as well call this guy.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a done deal at that point, but figured we go through the formalities of all that. And I know that there's 2 sides to every situation as to what God was doing here on our side of things and what God was working and doing on your side of things. And we can only know sort of after the fact the full reality of what God's accomplishing. And he was telling us no to all kinds of other things. Like you said, a position like this isn't the type of position you want to just advertise on the internet and see who applies, right? That's a risky way to do it. This is a key responsibility for articulating who and what Maranatha is and what God's doing here. So you've got to have just a perfect person. And it was we had attempted many plans along those lines of not necessarily having to go this route. So just as your life took those kind of unexpected things, the same thing was happening here. And so it was a lot of ups and downs behind the scenes. And then you see what God's really doing, and you go, oh, thank you, Lord, for not fulfilling what I thought was the plan, and putting together, your perfect direction and leading.
You, in that first initial phone call, you're like, Tim, your resume is exactly what I've been trying to find.
Right.
Someone with a foot in ministry, pastoral world, and a foot in executive management world, in both worlds. And it was funny. I'm thinking you're looking at this beautiful resume my brother helped me with. No, you were just looking at the online application one of Maranatha, which is kind of a interesting application for fill-in form. And
yeah, I didn't have your resume at that time.
So
I didn't
I
know
thought you
that
did,
you had
'cause
sent it in. Yeah, you did all that work on your resume.
I know.
I never saw it until after we pretty much made the decision.
But when you made that statement to me, I remember getting off the phone, and we have spent almost 2 podcasts now discussing my unique journey, and how God used me, and the key for me was, in this discussion, has been faithfulness.
Right.
God's called me to faithfulness and taking steps of faith and being content. And when you made that statement to me, I got off the phone and I just start crying. I'm like, Lord, forgive me, because I have spent so many years complaining about this journey.
Yeah.
And
about having to have a foot in both worlds and all that.
And yet that is the journey that uniquely places me here for this moment.
Right.
To be in this position. And
100%.
It was a humbling moment, and just of God's pouring his grace out on me.
Well, after our conversations in the early stages and starting to see the Lord put that together, it was important to me to reach out to Pastor Pilchard.
Yes.
And I reached out to Pastor Perry as well. And I said, what is your perspective on this guy? We went to school together. It's been a long time since then. You tell me, what is your perspective? And I talked to other people that have had influence in your life and along the way. And it was always that confirmation of the heart, the faithfulness, the desire to serve the Lord as evidenced. And each of them had a different angle on it and a different story to tell. And they all said, be careful, because you're just going to laugh like a lot. And hopefully you'll be able to, along the way, to have, in all the good time and fun that you're having, to get some work done, And so I look forward to that too. And that's been good advice. But I want to thank you for taking the time to open up yourself and be transparent about that, so that maybe others can see through the ups and the downs of life that in all of that, God is working. And really, truly, on an eternal scale, it doesn't go up and down. It all amounts to God's glory in our lives. And that our lives will have more ups and downs. But now we can look back with experience and with confidence to know that we can persist through those challenges in God's grace and hopefully see God glorified through all that. Thanks for your time, man.
Yes, thank you.
All right, let's get back to work.
Thank you for joining us today. On Mission is a production of Maranatha Baptist University. Subscribe to On Mission on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review, as this will help other growing leaders find these conversations. For information about our guests, previous episodes, and general information about On Mission or MBU, go to mbu.edu/podcast. Join us again next week as we examine what keeps leaders on mission.